From the outset, America's war for the greater Middle East was a war to preserve the American way of life, rooted in a specific understanding of freedom and requiring an abundance of cheap energy. In that sense, just as the American Revolution was about independence and the Civil War was about slavery, oil has always defined the raison d'etre of the war for the greater Middle East. Over time, other considerations intruded and complicated the war's conduct, but oil as a prerequisite of freedom was, from day one, an abiding consideration. As a young man, I required no instruction in that relationship, whose sweetness I had tasted firsthand. In June 1969, a newly commissioned shave-tail fresh out of West Point, I was home on leave courting the girl who was to become my wife. She lived on Chicago's South Side. My mother lived in Northwest Indiana. Every evening, I drove my brand-new Mustang Mach 1, candy apple red with black piping, into Chicago to see my beloved and then in the early morning hours returned home. Before each trip, I stopped at a service station to top off. 10 gallons at 29.9 cents per gallon usually sufficed. The $3 weren't trivial. A second lieutenant's pay came to $343 per month before taxes, more importantly, before the monthly car payment. But the expense took a backseat to romance. I do not recall wondering where the gas came from, Texas, California, nor about how much more there was. Like most Americans, I took it for granted that the supply was inexhaustible. All I knew for sure was that with 4 years of West Point behind me and Vietnam just ahead, life behind the wheel of a pony car in the summer of 1969 was pretty good. It is easy to disparage this version of freedom, as post-war social critics from C. Wright Mills and David Reisman to William White and Vance Packard had already done and others would do. For the ostensibly alienated and apathetic citizens of post-war America, trapped in a soul-deadening new universe of management and manipulation, as Mills put it, freedom had become little more than synthetic excitement. Maybe so. Yet, whatever the merit of that critique, it never made much of a dent in the average American's aspirations. The American way of life may have been shallow and materialistic, its foundation a bland conformity, but even for people of modest means, the exercise of American-style freedom did not lack for pleasures and satisfactions. As with the smell of a new car, those pleasures tended to be transitory. But an unspoken premise underlying that way of life was that there was more still to come. Americans preferring to measure freedom quantitatively, more implied bigger and better. Yet few of those driving or coveting the latest made-in-Detroit gas guzzler appreciated just how precarious such expectations might be. As I sped off to Chicago each evening, with radio and AC blasting, the gasoline in my tank was increasingly likely to come from somewhere other than a stateside oil field. In 1969, imports already accounted for 20% of the 15 million barrels that Americans consumed daily. The very next year, U.S. domestic oil production peaked at nearly 12 million barrels per day, thereafter beginning a decline that continued through the remainder of the century and appeared irreversible. The proportion of oil coming from abroad increased accordingly. Within a decade, imports of foreign oil had reached 8 million barrels per day. By 1973, even I was obliged to take notice. That fall, in retaliation for the U.S. supporting Israel in the October War, Arabs suspended oil exports to the United States and the West. The impact of the embargo was immediate and severe. The resulting oil shortage all but paralyzed the U.S. economy and produced widespread alarm among Americans suddenly deprived of the mobility that they now considered their birthright. Oil had become a weapon, wielded by foreigners intent on harming Americans. Here, it seemed coming out of nowhere, was a direct existential threat to the United States. With the crisis inducing another eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger announced that U.S. forces were on alert, pending their possible deployment to the Middle East. At the time, I was a captain, stationed at Fort Bliss, Texas, alongside El Paso and just across from Mexico. The regiment in which I served had war plans to deploy to West Germany to participate in NATO's defense of Western Europe. If required, we probably could have occupied Juarez. But we had no plans to fight in the Persian Gulf, whether to thwart a threatened Soviet intervention there or to seize Arab oil fields. The very notion seemed preposterous. At the time it was. Not for long, however.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.